The diner was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet where the clinking of coffee cups and the soft hum of the ceiling fan seemed louder than they should. At the corner, booth sat Arthur, an 81-year-old veteran whose back had grown frail with time, but whose eyes still held the steel of a man who had once faced down battlefields far away from home. He wore his old leather jacket, the one patched with faded military insignias, and sipped his coffee with the slow calm of a man who had earned every moment of peace life could offer. Then the door slammed open. A young man swaggered in, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. His hair was slicked back, his jeans torn at the knees, and his mouth curved in a smirk that hinted at trouble. He scanned the room like he owned it and spotted Arthur, alone at his booth, humming softly to the jukebox's old tune. The thug sauntered over. "What's up, old man?" he sneered, leaning down close enough that Arthur could smell the sharp tang of alcohol on his breath. Arthur didn't respond at first. He had seen men like this before, young, angry, desperate to prove themselves to a world that didn't care. But before he could answer, the thug slapped him across the face. The crack echoed in the diner like a gunshot, silencing the chatter, freezing the waitress mid-step. Arthur's head jerked, his hand trembling on the table. He didn't cry out, didn't curse. He simply closed his eyes, steadying himself as the weight of humiliation settled on his shoulders. The waitress gasped, rushing forward, but fear kept her a step back. "Respect your elders," the thug scoffed. "You're just a washed-up relic. This world isn't yours anymore." The door opened again. This time it wasn't just one man, it was a presence. A tall figure stepped in, his boots thudding against the diner floor. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold as they scanned the scene. He was Arthur's son, Daniel, a man whose broad shoulders carried years of loyalty and silence. Behind him followed the unmistakable rumble of leather and chains, the scent of exhaust, and the aura of brotherhood. One by one, the Hell's Angels filed into the diner. The thug froze, his arrogance slipping into uncertainty. He looked at Daniel, then at the sea of bikers whose vests bore the fearsome insignia of the Angels. Daniel's voice was low, steady, and dangerous. "What did you just do to my father?" The thug's mouth opened, but no words came. His bravado had been slapped clean off his face, replaced by the pale mask of fear. Arthur, still seated, touched his cheek and shook his head softly. "Danny," he murmured, his voice calm despite the sting, "don't do something you'll regret." But Daniel's eyes never left the thug. His father had been through war, through fire and chaos, and had given his life to protect people who would never know his name. And now, here was some punk thinking he could lay a hand on him. The diner seemed to shrink as the Angels surrounded the thug, their boots circling, their presence suffocating. The waitress, though frightened, couldn't help but feel a flicker of relief. For once, justice had walked in wearing leather jackets. Daniel leaned down so close the thug could feel his breath. "This man," he said, pointing to Arthur, "fought so people like you could walk free. He sacrificed everything, and you think you can disrespect him. Not today." The thug stammered, I didn't mean." "Didn't mean?" Daniel cut him off, his voice sharp as steel. "You don't lay hands on an old man, especially not my father." Arthur's voice rose then, soft but firm, the voice of a soldier who had commanded men. "Daniel, enough." His eyes held his son, filled not with anger but with wisdom. "We don't repay cruelty with cruelty. That's not who we are." The diner went silent again. The Angels looked to Daniel, waiting. Slowly he straightened, his fists unclenching. He stepped back, leaving the thug trembling in the middle of the floor. Arthur rose, his frail frame steadied by sheer willpower. He stood before the thug, his cheeks still red from the slap. "Son," he said, not to Daniel but to the thug, "one day you'll be old too, and if you're lucky, you'll have lived a life worth respecting. Don't waste your years trying to be feared. Earn the kind of respect that follows you even when you can't raise your voice." The thug's eyes dropped. He couldn't hold Arthur's gaze. Shame colored his face as he stumbled back toward the door, mumbling excuses before bolting into the night. The tension broke. The waitress let out a shaky breath, clutching her notepad to her chest. The other patrons, who had been frozen in fear, began to murmur relief. Daniel placed a hand on his father's shoulder, his eyes softening. "I can't stand by and watch someone hurt you," he said quietly. Arthur smiled faintly. "I know, son, but sometimes standing tall is louder than throwing fists." The angels sat down then, filling the diner with their laughter, their booming voices, their heavy boots against the floor. They ordered coffee, burgers, pie, filling the place with life again. The waitress moved quickly from table to table, her fear melting into gratitude. Arthur sat back in his booth, his son beside him, and looked around at the men who had ridden in to defend him, not with violence but with presence. For the first time in a long while, his heart swelled, not with pride for the battles he had fought but with pride for the lesson he had passed on. Outside, the sound of motorcycles lined the street, a silent warning to anyone who thought cruelty could win. Inside, the old veteran leaned back, his son's hand resting firmly on the table, and whispered, "Respect, that's the only legacy worth leaving." The message lingered in the air long after the plates were cleared. Strength isn't just about fists or fear. It's about honor, loyalty, and knowing when mercy is the loudest roar. And that night, in a quiet little diner, an old veteran proved that even in a world full of chaos, dignity could still stand taller than hate.